Okay. Okay, so we are starting this session. So welcome to the World Café. So whereby we'll be speaking about climate finance. Today is the Climate Finance Day at COP. So this is the best moment in order to speak with with the speakers about the role of young people in climate action and what why do we need finance and what are the barriers. So Nathan, you want to start?
Yes, thank you so much, Jason. I hope you can hear us. I'm Nathan. I see a lot of friends here. It's really cool. Thanks for coming to this. I'm one of the 7 youth advisors to the UN Secretary General, just for a few days more, and then we'll pass to others to carry on that task. We just had a meeting with him, and it was a very blessed moment and a lot of joy and cry as well. So we're very happy to be here with Jason, with Archana, with Paloma, with Kate, with Farana, with Ida, and others. So the goal of this session is to launch a global report that we led with the 7 youth advisors to the UN Secretary General. I'm sure you know many of them on there. We basically, during our mandate as youth advisors, realized that one thing was always coming up in the consultations that we were having with young people, with many of you including, the lack of funding for our work, the lack of funding for our campaigns, and so on. And so we convinced Kate Hampton here, the CEO of the Children Investment Fund Foundation, to give us funding to fund a world study on the impact and needs of youth climate justice movements. This is our research team. Felix is somewhere here in the background. He was part of the research team, and others who are based. And we had one young researcher from the Global North and one from the Global South in Latin America. So basically, as you can all imagine, funders have a long way to go. And this is why here we brought together a couple of really incredible funders and advocates of funding youth movements. So I'll start with the numbers, and then Archana will explain more the qualitative part of the study. First, let's start with, I'm so sorry, you're gonna have your neck. If you want to move a little bit in that, Farana, you're more than welcome. So as some of you might know, out of all global philanthropy, there's only 2% that goes to climate change. We looked at this number and we thought, can we find a number for how much of this 2% goes to youth movements? And we found out that youth-led climate justice initiatives only represent 0.76% of all climate grants from the largest foundation. This is very little. It basically represents 40 million, a little bit more than 40 million dollars to youth-led climate justice organization. And this is for 3 years. So it's basically only $14 million coming to youth climate justice movements every year for the past 3 years. And of course, there is the question of North America. As many of you know, most of the money is in North America. And so we looked at the situation there. So for work in the United States, the top 10 climate grantees together receive more than 20 times the funding directed to youth-led climate justice initiative in the United States. This is a graph that also explains a little bit the difference between those two, and you can see how little goes to youth climate justice movements. Despite receiving just 1% of total US climate philanthropy, youth climate justice networks in the US receive 16 times more than any other youth-led movements all around the world. So that just gives a little bit perspective as well of, the question of funding youth. It also depends, of course, in the world and especially in the US. So we kind of looked as well in terms of the different countries. 18 million in the past 3 years on average went to in the past 3 years, went to the United States, and you can see for all the other countries how little came. And this is something that we try to understand, and Archana will explain later what the US is. The US youth climate justice movements are taking more funding. And because Ida is here, who is one of the executive director of the European Climate Foundation, we also came with those slides that show how little funding is going to Europe, for example. with Western Europe getting much more than others, but still, we're talking about $800,000, right? And here in the audience, there's some people from Youth and Environment Europe, and they know how real this is on the ground and how little comes to our movements, especially in Eastern and Southern Europe. And we're so sorry we didn't get the numbers for Africa, for Latin America, and for South Asia, but hopefully with the funding we get, we'll get that for next year. For all countries in the world to be funded at the US level, we would need an additional of $158 million. So this is a big jump because, as I said before, we're only at $14 million, but this is what we're trying to get, getting to $158 million for all youth organizations in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe, in South Asia, to get to the level of US-based youth-led climate justice networks. And maybe we move a little bit out of the numbers with Archana.
So, hello. Correct? Hello. Yeah. So Nathan shared about the data, but we would like to share about what young people think and what is young people's perspective in terms of youth-led movements, in terms of funding, what are our challenges, what is our perception about philanthropies and funding spaces, what we need to be done. So we move ahead in terms of that. So we spoke to young people and interviewed young people. So we spoke to them in terms of what are the structural challenges which young people are facing. The key thing which came is that many leading activists have no regular funding and can't sustain themselves. So I think it's really critical that we are here advocating ourselves mostly and majorly in a voluntary capacity. We have barely funding for ourselves, and it is very difficult to sustain ourselves when we know that we are here and we are seeing policy changes because of work. The second thing is there is need for leadership development to support the next cohort of leaders. We see so many changes in the policy making discourse, decision making. We are out there fighting and advocating, but what about next generation of youth? What about us in a next capacity? What about other young people and children who will be joining these spaces? Do we have funding for them? Do we have allocation for them? Do we have space to even make a choice to be in these spaces? Because it's bare minimum like we sustain ourselves. The third thing is security is a major concern, particularly for campaigners working in repressive context. We barely have funding. Second, we are also facing security challenges. And how we can see that we have financial resources and allocation which is supporting not only in us to sustain or continue our work, but also protecting us and ensuring there is safe and enabling spaces for us young people. As we move ahead, and it's also one of the perspective which came from young people is it's difficult to get back onto strike and be on ground, specifically after COVID. So it has been really difficult to reboot the strike after COVID when it is still difficult for people to meet in numbers. So how do we sustain and have allocation of resources in our respective regions in whatever work we are doing in different capacities? Activists from the 2019 onwards who have been advocating facing issues like burnout, and I think it's really important to acknowledge it that we are facing burnout and there is emotional and physical well which needs to be center of climate activism and youth movement. So how do we have spaces and resources allocation for also to take care of our mental and physical well-being? Training capacity is under-resourced all over the world, and we need leaders and we need young people to be in the spaces. But what about capacity building? What about resource allocation in terms of capacity building? So these are the main challenges which we had from young people shared to us. So now I hand it over to Nathan to share a few of the quotes which the young people shared with us.
And so there was one of the quotes that really kind of, I'll just read the quotes as they come. We need security for the territories, and for ourselves, we live under death threats. Most of the information or training provided is in English. There is no information of funding in indigenous languages.
Now we move on to the next question or thematic which we ask young people is like what youth movements need from funders. So young people have shared and have been emphasizing that we need multi-year funding, and I think it's really critical to have multi-year funding so that it is a process which is not once at a time but it is going in a recurring basis and in a continuation. The second thing is responsive and flexibility, because we have lots of to-do list and criteria which often acts as challenges to young people. So need funders to be flexible and responsive, because at times we are facing challenges which is for the first time. Now, like we had disasters like cyclone, floods, and drought. So how do we also respond to that, and how can we get access to resources for that? So it becomes really important to have funding and finance allocation which is responsive and flexible. And I think this is really important, that which has been said in the by young people, is that respect and trust to be treated as equals. We all are equals. Young people need to be treated as equal when we are talking about climate finance, when we are talking about financial allocation, because that's how we go together working with respect and solidarity. And I feel that so critical, which needs to be also supported in terms of philanthropies and funders. It's also like co-creation of progress metrics. I think this is again really critical, because often we see that you have certain standards of parameters of what success look like and how will work, but that doesn't work in terms of different contexts of young people, and specifically from indigenous people, local communities, Afro descendants, and mostly those who are most affected by climate crisis, where there's barely any resources. So it's really important to contextualize what progress look like and work with communities, and that's why it's co-creation of progress metrics. And low burden administration, I think it's really important when we speak to funders, is like how do we ensure that we have low administrative burdens, because young people want to work and we don't want to be under administrative burdens which creates us challenges. So it's also important that how do we have low administration burdens, or how do we have capacity building or support where young people can also choose to administer themselves in terms of financial allocation. So it's really important to have processes in place which is flexible and low administrative burden. And support for movement infrastructure for collaboration and alignment. I think it's really important to have infrastructures, because often we work in a compartments, or we work in one set of rules and regulation. We need to be adaptive to the climate crisis, and for that we really need a infrastructure which is adaptive, which is open for collaboration and alignment. We also need security from funders, because most of us work in a very difficult space coming from really critical regions. And how do we ensure that these funding is also going to ensure safe and enabling spaces for us? Like, it's been like multiple COPs or environmental meetings. Wherever we go, young people are sleeping off floors and sleeping on other places. We don't have houses to stay. We don't have houses to we don't have places to eat, and it's been going on. So how do we ensure that young people are also having safety, security in terms of physical and other forms? It's really critical. And what about others who were not able to join in this COP, because even after they had accreditation, they did not have fund to join here? So it's really critical to have security on those lines as well. So I'll pass on to Nathan to share the quotes on key needs.
One of our interviewees said one of the biggest barriers is getting donors to embrace and support new faces in the movements, fresh ideas. Back to you.
Yeah, so now it's like what youth movements need for funders. I think one of the key things which we have been listing and which we receive from young people is like support for leadership development. And I think it's so important because we all are leaders in our own sphere, but people often do not consider as our leaders in their own parameters. So how do we ensure that we are nurturing grassroots leadership and leadership across decision making spaces and across regions? And I think it's really important that we have mentoring because, we want to work together. We need your support. We want to hear from you. We need to learn from you. And that's why we need mentoring from you also, that how do we access these resources and how we engage in these spaces. And again, resources for well-being and addressing burnout, because it's really difficult to sustain in this space which is like so demanding and so difficult. And yes, campaign resources, which is communication and legal advice, I think it's really critical because you all have been engaging in these spaces and have been advocating it in multiple levels, and we need your wisdom and experience to help us in terms of communication and legal advice as well. And I think it's really important. Today we are here at COP27, which is like a decision making is in the climate processes. But often we young people are only limited to spaces like pavilions, which I know it's really important, but we also need to be directly having access to decision making spaces, and how we can reach out to them, how we can have interaction with them. So we would really seek your support that we have direct access to decision makers. And being as member of UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, I feel the access which we got to be part of UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group, it was a open and safe spaces. We need more of spaces like this where we are being able to access those spaces and young people are being able to speak their heart out without any fear. And advocacy funders using their own voices appropriate where appropriate in service of movement, because we know that it's a huge network of yours, so we would really like you all to support and also share about our words, our work in your own network. So it's also like championing us, which you all have been doing it, but we need more stronger support in terms of championing for all of us here. And it's like again introduction and about learning, because I today we are here because Kate, we are so grateful for helping us for this research and study that we are being able to speak here about the key challenges and issues, and Farana and Ada, and we would really need your support in terms of more further championing and introduction to these spaces, because we cannot sustain without finance in a sustainable way. So I think it's really critical to emphasize on that.
And another quote that really struck us was when this UK youth climate campaigner told us that something that would be very helpful would be being able to get introduction easier. The only really successful way that I found to make these things happen is to be able to have amazing advisors like yourselves who can make these introductions or speak in really high-level places. Another Pacific Islander youth climate campaigner told us donors can add value beyond the funding. We have a very good donor who advises us on media and how to approach journalists. That is extremely helpful. And I think that speaks very well to what Archana was saying, to go beyond the funding.
Yeah. Also, I would like to emphasize on key concerns of us, and we would request you all to be thoughtful about it and understanding about it. Like youth-led movements have informal structures, but when it comes down to funding, we often look for formal structures of fundings, and that acts as a barrier. So we want you all to be considerate and understanding that youth-led movements have different structures, formal, informals, and various regional structures, which is like open to context, and it is really needs to be understood. It's also really important that leaders inevitably transition through the organizations and are replaced. So it should not be, one face value which is driving the resources, but it is the organization, it is the youth collective, it is the youth coming together who are being access finance. And small grants can be hard to administer, but I think it's really difficult to emphasize that funding, whether large grants or small grants, it's really important to reach to young people, because it's really important to understand that every penny or every financial allocation makes difference. But often we like to have accountability and transparency, efficiency, which is important, but often it is also difficult to see, or penny by penny make sure that where the money is going, because it is going in a youth movement in the structures and different regions. And funders may lack necessary contacts with the youth-led movement, so how we can make initiative, or how we can make sure that we are being able to have uh, this efforts to identify youth groups and also reach out to them. And I think this is what this pavilion, and this is what this I think study helped us, is like identifying about contacts. And I would also like to pitch in like Farhana and her initiative also working on that, identifying youth groups, youth-led initiative, indigenous groups. And I think that's a really, really important work, that we need to identify people, we need to compile the groups of people who are working on different regions. And yes, movement need ongoing support and approaches to evaluate their impact. I think it's really important, because often we have certain standards of impact, but that doesn't work everywhere, because impact is different in different contexts. And I think it needs to be understood what is coming from a lens of young people.
Thank you so much. And so you can find everything about the Youth Climate Justice Study online. We'll send after, we'll also have QR codes and everything, and you will see on all our social media and different organizations. But this website has very much been designed as a tool for every single youth organization to utilize. There is a lot of data, there's a lot of arguments, there's a lot of quotes, and you can also there download a very big slide deck of more than 150 slides that you can use the way you want to pitch to funders, to like find arguments that maybe can help you to also unlock funding in your organization. And in this website as well, there is a sort of call for funders to be, of course, funding more youth. This is clearly something that is needed, the 0.76%, but also to fund differently, to be more, flexible, co-organizational ground, long-term ground, but also, as we discussed today, that funders can be a little bit more also as mentor than just funders. And I think that here we have incredible examples of people who have been not just funders but mentors to us. And the third thing, which is a call on philanthropy, to also include young people and youth activists within their own structures. And so we're calling on philanthropy to hire youth climate activists in their staff, to bring them in their working spaces, and also potentially to think how they can include them in their governance structure, right? Many of us here are part of adults organization, have been part of adults or NGOs, and so we're also call on philanthropy to involve us in their design. And right now we'll go to a new moment, which is a panel discussion moderated by the incredible Paloma Costa. If you don't know her already, she will introduce herself. I'll give you my mic. And then with Kate Hampton, who is the CEO of the Children Investment Fund Foundation based in London, who is also the very reason, not just of the study, but of this whole youth pavilion, because she funded it. So really happy to have you, Kate, here. Farah Nayamin, who is an incredible activist in the UK, who is also the coordinator of the Climate Justice Donors Collaborative and has been a champion of our work since the beginning. And also Ida, who is the executive director of the European Climate Foundation, who's been mentoring us and who helped us organize our first reception with funders at COP26 in New York, and we really appreciate it.
Whoa! Amazing! So, for us to start this session and this panel, I really want everyone to cheer them up because they are really outstanding women. I'm so proud of being in a panel with so many women because we know the future is female, it's Pachamama. We know that, so everyone cheer them up because they deserve it. Yes, 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 let's do it. I mean, how many people are here because of them, you know? So we need to be very grateful and we need to move forward because they are on our side. So for us to start this momentum, I really wanted to know if you knew about the results of the study. You know about the 0.76 and that a lot of it go to US activists. I am from Latin America, Archana from Asia representing him. There are so many activists here doing so many amazing things. I know we did a compendium to have this elaborated. So did you know about this data? And that's the first question. I will give three so you can answer to all of them. The first is that, were you aware? The second one is, so if you knew or if you're not new, what your organization have been doing around that? Because I think it will be very interesting for young people that are present here for them to understand how they can reach you, what you've been doing, what are the main things that you've been financing and how you've been supporting young people. And the third is, how can we cooperate? There are so many incredible young people here. We have the pavilion. Everyone is like doing other thing here, trying to talk with negotiators, trying to understand, to access decision makers. So how can we better cooperate? I always love to say that young people are the ones standing with the forest, standing with the oceans, with everything, with our planet. We are the ones in the front, we are the ones leading. So how can we cooperate? How can we access funds? And how can youth-led, especially the ones on climate justice initiatives, can have a way to look forward? So I will call first Kate. So if you can tell us a little bit and answer on that, it will be very nice. Thank you.
Thanks, Paloma, and thanks, Nathan, and thanks to everybody who's involved in the study. Well done. So I had my suspicions the numbers would be low. I'm not surprised it's around 1%. I mean, it's also shocking that only 2% of philanthropy goes to climate in general. And I think there are lots of reasons for that. We can talk about structural reasons, operational reasons, and cultural reasons, and barriers, essentially. And then I think we need to think also about the structural, operational, and cultural solutions to all of that. So I think in many ways, it's important to understand that philanthropy is a construct arising out of inequality in the first place. So let's call out the elephant in the room. I've made my peace with that because I know there are plenty of billionaires on quote unquote the other side. So I'm quite happy there are a few billionaires on quote unquote our side. And I feel it is my job to help in the redistribution of that. But it's important to understand as a consequence the structural, operational, and cultural implications that come from that heritage, and recognize that the concentration of wealth is, of course, reflects the concentration of wealth in society. So heavily concentrated in the United States and Europe, although we're now seeing increasing amounts of philanthropy in other parts of the world. So that geographic concentration also is a cause of many of the things that Nathan was speaking about. So I think you have to have that context. Philanthropy is also now regulated in different ways in different geographies. So the UK's Charity Commission is quite a heavy regulator. In the US, it's not very heavily regulated, but it's totally focused on preventing charitable funds being used for political purposes. Like, that is the sole focus of the American regulation in this space. In the UK, we have very specific regulations around governance and safeguarding and different kinds of compliance, bribery and corruption, all sorts of other things, which explains on an operational basis a lot of the barriers, administrative barriers and other things which are in place. And then you have cultural. So we talked a bit about structural, talked a bit about operational. Cultural are, you may just not know young people. You may just not have the right networks. You may just think it's too difficult. And these are all of the cultural barriers that we have to overcome. And the best way to overcome that is much, much more engagement, much, much more listening on behalf of philanthropic staff. So rather than just observing the barriers, it's incumbent upon the funding community to actively seek ways to overcome those barriers. It's our responsibility of those that hold power and resources to actively invest in overcoming those barriers. Some of them are real, some of them are outside our control, some of them are invented and have perverse consequences of excluding young people, and we need to see how we unravel those. So at SIF, we're the world's largest foundation focused on children. We spend about $500 million a year, half on climate, half on other issues like malnutrition, sexual reproductive health and rights, trafficking, and so on. Interestingly, we've spent a lot more money on youth movements related to children's health and well-being than we have on climate. So we're a major funder, for example, of young feminist movements. We funded the AU Youth Envoy. We funded the youth constituency within the Partnership on Maternal and Child Health. And all of that work is based on the principle, nothing for us without us. If you're addressing things that impact children and young people, they should be not just at the table, but actively involved in the design of those policies and programs. So I've been trying to take sort of that learning and that understanding into the way that we approach what happens on climate, because who is more affected than young people and children on climate? Nobody. So it's trying to bring some of that learning around supporting youth movements into the climate space. I would say just a couple of things which give me pause. First of all, having essentially billionaires supporting youth activists is the best way to delegitimize youth activists, right? Many of you are operating in contexts where foreign funding is seen as a real problem, and activists are often labeled as instruments of foreign funders and other things. So it's really important to understand all of those things in the way that this is approached, because the funder should not become the problem. But that's not an excuse, that's an issue. So I've answered, I think, questions 1 and 2. Question 3, very, very briefly, I think this is something that we're going to have to learn to do together, essentially. And I think it's about, who was here for Mia Motley yesterday? Were any of you here for Mia Motley? She talks about handing the baton. And, you know, we could stretch that metaphor a long way. At the moment, funders are sort of running 10 meters away from young people and say, here, come and get it, right? That's not passing the baton. Or we're handing it over to young people and it's covered in grease and you immediately drop it. What we need, and you know, effective relay runners, I'm really pushing the metaphor now. Like, the next person is running with you and you're doing a really effective handover. Even better than that, I want young people on our team. So we need to get to a place where we're making it impossible for you to grab the baton, to the place where you're handing us the baton, we're handing it back, and we're part of the same team. We're not there yet, but that's what we're trying to do. You got your own.
I think Kate's passed on the baton, so thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for the study. Studies are really, really important because often they validate hugely the lived experience. And certainly in my case, I left philanthropy really frustrated because I wasn't getting the funding as a black and brown person in the UK of the kind that is going. And apart from the 2% and now the 0.76%, 2%, 1%, let's round it up. Actually, most philanthropy and climate philanthropy is going to organizations led by men, like 80% according to one study, and to white people, 90% of that figure is going to organizations run by white people. And so these systemic injustices are experienced daily and absolutely were the motivation for the network that I'm coordinating, which is a network called the Climate Justice Just Transition Donor Collaborative. And we have those 2 words because those 2 words are in the Paris Agreement as a result of many activists, as a result of many movements, as a result of the labor movement, as a result of your predecessors who fought for them in the Paris Agreement, you know, years and years ago. And the collaborative is itself a consortia It's organized and was the initiative of the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, which was one of the first funds to then give grants to movements and younger people. Some of them are sitting in the audience right now. So you all know Heather McRae, who's sitting in the audience and is a pioneer in this field. And the network is composed of the IKEA Foundation, Climate Works, which is itself one of the largest foundations, Porticus, the Bosch Foundation initially, and I'm forgetting one, Oak Foundation, of course, Oak Foundation, which many of you know. So I want to just call out and thank them because they have tried to move forward and understand that a different kind of philanthropy is needed to respond now to the new actors, to the new players, and to their new vision. And for me, I've also worked in philanthropy for quite a long time, on and off. And actually, the structures and procedures are what you're also asking for a rehaul of. And we need that very rapidly. So I think just answering your second question, yes, funding for individuals really matters. It's when you have often the most energy, the most interesting ideas, instead of, I think, thinking of climate change in greenhouse gases per capita, think of it as solutions per capita. Every person is coming with a solution. And in fact, the vast majority of the world is not being funded for any of those solutions because the funding is going in a very skewed way to others who are trying to push solutions that don't make sense to the vast majority of the world. So that's the geographic imbalance that we have. I think before they establish movements, before they establish NGOs, before they become part of the table, the discussion table, people need funding to be able to do that, whether it's a train ticket, a plane ticket, whether it's a taxi ticket. So these small scale funding really matters. And we've used in the last 2 years, as a result of the work that we had about 400,000 for COP1 and COP26 and this COP. And we funded about 100 organizations and individuals. And whether it was picking up a $500 ticket, whether it was actually booking that ticket, to bringing them here, to providing them support, to booking accommodation. In the case of this COP, rebooking their accommodation. That is all the kind of support that individuals need. And I think some of those functions could be centralized and made more effective if not everybody in the donor community was doing it individually. So there's a really big need for us to create a network of re-granters and granters who are working in this space so that we're not all, doing the same thing inefficiently, that we can actually have the equivalent of the UNFCCC Secretariat, books all the developing country tickets for them and does the DSAs for them. So there's no reason why we can't establish something like that, for example, for those things. The second area of experience and which our work from the compendium of climate justice and just transition organizations and funders is revealing is actually there are now small-scale funding available. There are lots of organizations sort of setting up accelerator programs. Then they have been giving 5K to 10K to outstanding individual organizations. And then that's it. There's a cliff after that. And plus, they're all oversubscribed. So we need to have something where there is no cliff, that after you've built up your amazing idea with your 5K, 10K, you can then apply for 50K, 100K, and you are well served, as well as we need to do that. So again, funders need to network to massively deal with that gap. And I think finally, the scale of the challenge. I am calling on these two amazing women who are sitting next to me, Heather, who was sitting there, Helen Mountford from Climate Works, who's also around. There's dozens of women in the world of philanthropy who can convene each other, and each of them should put in a pot of $50 million, at least, and get $1 billion for youth funding, and give that to the existing re-granting organization, give that to the existing funders who are already doing this amazing work, and give that in a way that is trusted and participatory, and as Archana said, is a different model of funding which treats young people as equals. And finally, I've been mentored in the last 2 years by movements and also by young people. So reverse mentoring is absolutely what I'm really in favor of. I learn and I'm overjoyed to be educated in this area and to make sure that everything I do based on the last 30 years is well and truly handing off the baton, but a very different one. a very different one from the one that I had to deal with. So that's my contribution to your questions. Thank you. So let's get a billion. Let's get a billion.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So the problem with going last is that those who've gone before me have really said it all. Now I have to say, just of all, it's a bit fuzzy, isn't it?
Yeah, I think is around chain decarbon.
Is that a little bit better? Yeah. No. Okay, so I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for the work that you all do, your activism. I wish when I was your age that I had an ounce of your courage. Sometimes when I read these kind of reports, well, this is the first of a kind, but when I read and I see what you do, I think, wow, I wish I had half that courage, an ounce of that courage back in the day. And thank you to Sif and to Kate for your leadership and your team for this, because was I surprised? Did I know about this? I was just so disappointed when I read those figures. I just went, wow. You know, my job is basically, I'm a fundraiser. That's what I do at ECF. And it's really tough fundraising. But when you see those kind of pathetic figures, I'm thinking, Farhan, you're absolutely right. Let's set the bar high. Let's go for $1 billion. So I'm totally with that. So maybe I wasn't surprised seeing the figures, but I was like, oof, ouch, that hurts. There's a lot more we can do. What's our organization been doing around youth? Well, somebody who's known to some of you here, somebody that we hired into our team, Nais, has just led a report going across all the different parts of ECF, which is a sprawling, complex organization, pulling together an internal report to say, what are we doing on youth? What grants are we giving youth? What non-monetary support are we doing? And for the first time, we have all of that somewhere. And she got that ready for us last week before we came here. I must share it with you. It's mostly internal, but it tells an interesting tale. And it shows how much more we can do. And really what that's doing is that it's helping us advocate in our networks, both internally and externally across the climate philanthropy community, that supporting youth, both monetary-wise and non-monetary-wise, is about moving from seeing youth as a risk and a liability to an asset. And that's the key point. And that's where we need to bring, because when you work on the side of having the money, we're the privileged few. And it's our job, with that privilege, we have a responsibility to really get that message across. And the final thing, how can we cooperate? There's lots of notes that I made when I was flicking through the report and then when I saw it there. But the overall thing, I was struck by one of your calls for help with designing your metrics. So here's what I think about this. And Kate, you might need to close your ears on this week. Metrics are no good unless they're serving you to see what you are learning. So let's look at how you can use metrics to feed what you and what we are learning from the work that you do. And that's where I think we should cooperate. Otherwise, metrics for metrics' sake are just, time consuming. But if they're helping us learn about what we're doing, what we need to course correct, and where we go next, then they're fabulous. So thank you.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. Now, I really want that this conversation is smooth and that everyone has the time to participate. So now, before we end this second moment of our conversation, I would really like to open the floor for anyone wanting to have a question. Nathan will be supporting me with giving the mic. So No, maybe this one. Okay, so let's go. Let's put the barriers high.
Yeah, hello, hi. My name is Shandal O'Neill, pronouns they, their, them. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. I'll wait until I supposedly have the attention of the panelists to continue speaking.
Sorry, I was distracted by the water. Sorry, can you repeat the question? My apologies.
Hi, I am Shandal O'Neill, pronouns they, their, them. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
I'm a sustainable energy specialist and a human rights advocate. Fahana touched on it a little bit. So my straight question is, how do we overcome the brown paper bag test for access and representation and financing?
Well, lots and lots of education is needed to decolonize thinking. So let's pay those people who are doing that work and see that as a climate education. It's often not linked. The link between racial justice and climate justice is not well understood. And one of our webinars that we did as part of the Climate Justice Just Transition Collaborative had 400 people actually registered and attended it, was about philanthropy and racial justice. Philanthropy is now also recognizing how white it was. And of course, that's one of the reasons why there are such skewed patterns of giving. So there is a huge amount going on JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And many of the foundations have now actively recruited and are giving decision-making powers and increased funding to a much more diverse set of players within philanthropy. And then I think exercises such as the one that we're doing to compile and make visible all of the work in the Global South, especially, and allies in the North, but very, very much from the Global South, who are already doing amazing global justice work. They need to be made accessible to everyone. So you don't have to start from scratch. And we've started this quite nerdy, it is very nerdy, it's very wonky, it's like a gigantic database that we are going to put on a wiki site and make available. And it's imperfect, it's kind of like a dictionary, it's the first dictionary that everyone will be able to add to say what are they working on and to make that visible. So there's no excuse for philanthropy to not know who's out there in diverse countries doing intersectional work. And actually that is an education barrier that we can tackle. It's a solvable barrier that we can tackle.
So I think it's really important to understand that most philanthropies don't have offices in the countries in which they're working. Some do and some don't. So when I inherited SIF 7 years ago, there were like 150 staff, of which 3 or 4 were in the countries where we were doing work. And they were kind of outposts. They didn't have any decision-making power. They were just representative offices.
Neocolonialism, that's what you call it.
Yeah, so now at SIF, 50% of our staff are from the countries where we work. So we've got offices in Nairobi, Addis, Beijing, and Delhi. It's not been simple setting up those offices, by the way, because of the complex regulatory issues around opening an office in China, opening an office in India, wherever. And most of our back office is in London. But still, I massively underestimated the cultural barriers around, in the NGO sector, in the development sector, in the environmental sector, actually giving away power and the impediments to that at every single level, governance, staffing, whatever. And even just trying to get talent to rise up in the organization. What are the reasons why people of color or women are not achieving positions of high management? And it's reflected in the business sector, it's reflected in financial institutions. I mean, we're talking about World Bank reform, where the governance is totally within the hands of the G7. Private equity in Africa, there is more private equity going to white-run funds in private equity investing in Africa than black African-run funds investing in Africa, which is ludicrous, right? So this is a pervasive problem of racism. Our sector is not in any way insulated, but we have a responsibility to be way ahead of the business community and international institutions. And by God, it's taken a really long time. And thank goodness for the Black Lives Matter movement, because it has really shaken up the NGO sector as well. And I think we have a huge responsibility to ask ourselves the question every single time, why am I taking the decision? Because it's the millions of micro decisions that add up to the system. It's not just the big things, it's the who do I talk to every day? Where do I get my intelligence from? To Fahana's point, where is my information coming from? Every single day you take 50 decisions that might send you in a particular direction. And unpacking all of that it's not easy, but it's work that we have to do.
I recommend anti-oppression training. I conduct it if you ever need it. You have my contact information, no worries.
We'll just take a few questions at a time, so we'll take 3 questions, and hopefully you can remember everything.
Thank you. It's been very interesting to listen to all of you and study. My name is Wayne Traub. I'm a youth climate justice activist from Argentina, from Youth for Climate Argentina. A lot of the work I do is fundraising, finding the resources to be able to implement and plan different programs. So I was wondering, what are some of the insights and tips that you've learned over the years, some like practical tips that you can share? What are the do's and what are the do-nots in order to fundraise successfully?
That one is definitely for Ida and for Christy over there. One more and one more.
Thank you. Hi. First of all, thank you all for what you're doing. I just want to know, how are you planning to reach the unheard voices of Global South? For example, I'm from Bangladesh, and Bangladesh has a lot of unheard voices who are doing a great job. So what's your plans on reaching to them and supporting them? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brutus Mbambi from Zambia, and I'm the National Youth Program Coordinator, and we've trained 1,000 youth environmental defenders. And you spoke about cultural barriers in the organization, also finances of accessing young people. So how do you bring the platform to Zambia to support young people? Since I'm running a biggest movement in Zambia that is involving women and girls in rural areas as well as urban areas, how best can we work together as the one community?
And I just wanted to give the floor to Christy, if you want, from the Urban Movement Innovation Fund, because there was a great question on fundraising, and Christy is an amazing fundraiser, and Ida as well. So maybe we can answer them, and then we have.
Sure. So I'm Christy Lockhart. I'm the Partnerships Advisor at. Can you hear me? A little bit. Okay. Hi. Hello. Is that better? Yes. Okay. Hi. I'm Christy Lockhart. I'm the Partnerships Advisor at UMI Fund. We are Donors Collaborative, working across a number of movements. Our focus really is on driving greater investment across and to support frontline activists working on climate change. Youth being one of our key areas that we're working on. And just to answer a bit about the question about fundraising, I think, in my opinion, this is probably unpopular with a lot of fundraisers. Don't compromise. Everybody is not your donor. Stay true to who you are, be authentic, and make sure that you find the donor who's going to allow you to achieve the vision for that you see, and do it in a way that is supportive of your strategies and your approaches. It takes a little bit more work, but I think in the end, that's where you get the best results.
And Christy was a great mentor for many of us, including myself. Does that work?
That's not a fuzzy one. Is that okay? A little bit fuzzy. A little bit louder. Okay. So fundraising insights and tips. I totally agree with you. And be authentic. And I would say, first of all, be bold. Be really bold. Think big. And focus on your value add. I remember Nathan, us having this conversation a couple of years ago or so. Focus on your value add, not saying how great you are, but where what your organization, where your movement is bringing value, and and really be bold and reach out for help. Reach out for help from other old, like, I mean, I'm an old gal at this stage, but I get much more value out of helping people, bringing up the line. The one thing we need in this field in climate, youth or otherwise, is we need skilled professionals coming up the line. And that takes time and that takes courage from organizations, but we especially need them from fundraising skills, because it's the job that a lot of people don't want to do. And they don't want to do it because they're afraid, because it's tough, it's hard work, it's nonstop. If you're going somewhere and you're doing something, there will always be some funder who wants something at that moment and everything. And one funder, and it's tough, but it's hugely rewarding, because you can actually look in your face in the morning and say, I know how I added value. I know that I tried, and so on. So I just say, be bold, reach out for help, and maybe together we can think about some sort of fundraising mentorship program together with UMI, that it's so sorely needed.
Well, I totally agree with everything that has been said, and to especially enforce, don't compromise, at this stage, because you are, I think, spotting, birthing a new value system. That is actually how I feel the new value add is. It isn't, coming along and just being more effective at climate campaigning. You're part of this vision of creating a new world, and in fact, the best intersectional work is already being done by many of you here, and you're helping to join up the many other siloed movements and siloed divisions that there were. So I think we need to join up the labor movement, those working on migrant justice and refugee issues, those working on climate and emissions, those working on food security, those working on water. And we have not done a great job of that. We've come from the silos, and I think you're free of them at this point, and leave yourselves free. And I think just to this question that was raised, how do we fund those who don't have websites or Instagram accounts or large followings or organizations to back them? I think there are many innovations happening which are sort of building off old experience in the development sector, like direct grants. We're also pioneering that in our little initiative. So we've just given $10,000 as grants for many fellows, and it's remarkable what they've done with them. Many used them to fund a gap they had. Many handed them over to others where they supported 10 other people with the funding that they got. And there are other things called like flow funding, which is that you give someone $10,000, $5,000, and actually their job is to fund others. And that is a really lovely gift. It's a whole new ecosystem that is created. And finally, I think philanthropy itself has to accept, someone sending in a video, a photograph, an oral report, or leaving a voicemail is a report. That is a report. We do not need, the qualified professionals. We want to hear directly, sometimes in more simplified ways, in real time, what's happening in local languages. And that is also my final point. Most philanthropy, most of climate literature, most of the resources and campaigning is going to English language resources. We all know that. And yet, that is a massive barrier to the rest of the world, playing their part. And again, it's actually youth, and one of your own youth leaders who's been identifying and working on that. So I think many of the other initiatives coming forward are frankly not requiring grants. They're requiring, they're very entrepreneurial, and they require a whole blend, and they're, private finance can fund them. The IT sector can fund them. AI can help this situation, and us old timers need to get out of the way, learn, and help those in those sectors connect with young people as well. So I know we're here talking about philanthropy, but philanthropy needs to work with all of these other sectors to create the 1 billion, I think, very quickly.
So on fundraising, my advice would be know your audience. Same as for advocacy. So look, there's a whole chain in philanthropy, right? I fundraise every day with my board. Okay, they're sort of top of the food chain, as it were, because they're the people that actually have the money. We fund organizations like UMI and European Climate Foundation. They fund other organizations. The important thing to understand is the closer you are to the money, the further you are from reality. And I think the problem is that most people in philanthropy don't realize that. It is my job to open as many channels as possible to understand and draw wisdom because I'm so far away. And my job is to basically pass that back up and know my audience so that I can send those resources back in the other direction. And I think understanding where people are coming from, what their organizational constraints are, is absolutely crucial. And just asking the question, why, is a really good way to find out why something's not like, why? No, sorry, we don't do that. Why? Do you know who does do that? Why? Just know your audience. And I think, as we go on this journey together, I think the exciting thing, and just to build on Farhana's point about creating a new world, some of you were here yesterday. I mean, I started life as an environmental campaigner at the age of 11. I'm now 48. Environmental campaigning when I was 11 was very different from where it is now. And even when I was in my 20s, my job as kind of a young woman in a world of, male middle-aged electrical engineers was to put on their clothes and convince them in their language that renewable penetration in the grid system would actually not undermine reliability on the, and blah, blah, blah. We are now, that's all important, but people have done a lot of that work for you. It is your job to approach these issues in a different way because we have reached the limit of what our generation has been able to achieve working with those theories of change, those messages, with those messengers, actually, who are a very, very narrow subset of society, let alone globally. So I completely agree with Farhana. Your space needs to be deeply intersectional and creative and different, and just keep asking us the question why, because there's always wiggle room, right? There's always, somebody's got discretion, and your job is to help find the discretion that people have to start doing things in a different way.
Woo! Away!
Paloma Costa for the energy. I just want to do a time check. Do you still have 10 minutes for Q&A, or it's becoming a little bit difficult? Huh? Okay, great. You need to leave? Okay. So what we'll do is that there's a couple of funders in the room. Christy here. There's also Mira just with the next to the. Anyways, Mira is there. Here as well, Sarah, right? So if you want also to talk to different people, and if the speakers can stay a little bit, then it's perfect. And yes, you wanted to share a few.
So thank you. So the Climate Justice and Just Transition Collaborative are having an event which will be philanthropy discussing what needs to happen next on the 14th of November in the Innovation Zone. Really recommend that you come. There's a shuttle bus now that takes you there. It's not so far. And everyone can go there who is here. So that's one event. And then on the 16th of November, there is another event which is primarily led by our young people and what we call our fellows to take some of these issues forward. So a little shout out for those of you who want to attend more events, and there are other funders who will be there from the collaborative that day. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I wanted to say there is also another funder here, so maybe the funder can just raise their hand if they can. So Mira, Christy, I'm so sorry, and also Sarah. And thank you so much just for coming, Ida, Farhana, Kate, thank you also for your leadership. I think a big thing that we've realized is how secretive the philanthropic world is, and you've definitely one of the pioneers in this, in opening the doors and being here, in being mentors, and we hope that this is just the start, not just about money, even if you're here when the cash needs to come, but also about mentorship, and for that we are really grateful. Thank you everyone. You can use the space the way you want. Thanks.